Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing the new David Fincher film, The Killer, currently airing on Netflix. So briefly, The Killer follows an unnamed killer whose career comes to an end when he's short of a target, triggering him to go on an international manhunt to save his life. So the movie is actually based on a French graphic novel by the same name, and it stars Michael Fassbender in one of his best performances. And upon a second watch, I do think this is one of David Fincher's best directed films. So this is the type of movie I wish I watched in theaters. It's about 2 hours long, but it goes by very quickly. And so the movie is divided into chapters according to this kill list that this killer has. And in terms of the tension, there were a number of standout scenes. And I think what made this movie really unique is you don't know how it's going to end. You know, it always feels like something is about to go horribly wrong. Like that fight scene had me like on the edge of my seat. There's a scene with this door closing that just had my heart skip a beat. And again, there's such meticulous care given to each and every one of his kills. And so you know he's like, it's coming, but it takes you by surprise. Ultimately, I think this movie did a very good job of getting us inside the mind of a man that's just like slowly losing his mind. So starting with what I like, I thought the decision to follow a single character was quite brave and really spoke to how great Michael Fassbender's performance really is. Let's talk about this killer. So the movie, because we're inside his head, it tries to convince you that he's actually very good at his job. But the more you watch him, the more you're like, sir, I think you need to switch professions. And again, either he's just not very good or he's just kind of bored and over it. So this killer, I mean, there's absolutely nothing relatable about him. Like it just seems like he spent his entire life indoctrinating himself and basically stripping himself of all humanity. Like there is just nothing inside him. The basic parts that are supposed to be inside him, like a person in him, like they just don't exist. So he seems like someone who has a very interesting job, right? Like he's a hitman, but in fact, it's very boring. It's very labor intensive. Like the movie opens up with a man watching a window. Like he might as well have been watching TV. Like that's how bored he was. And so most of his time is spent preparing, right, for these kills or just kind of removing all traces of them. And one of the things that stood out at me is the transitions from day to night. Like that was probably one of the best parts of this movie. And again, it just emphasized that how most of his time is just watching and waiting, right? It's just really boring. I think one of the commentaries this movie does so well is how like even doing what you love doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be entertained all the time. And it's not until he has this disaster happen to him that he kind of brings the joy back, right? Like he starts to come alive again. So before this whole disaster, right, we meet a man that's just so bored. Right, he's going through his day. He's not memorable, but he's pretty much lifeless, to be honest. Like there's just nothing about him that, like there's just nothing there. Watching him kind of set up for this kill that's about to go wrong was really interesting to me because I was just looking at him like he's listening to music. He has a whole narration in his head. And there were just so many signs like this was going to go horribly wrong. And again, this is someone who has been doing this for so long that he's kind of an autopilot, right? Like that kind of care that you would take maybe at the beginning of your career, you know, he's kind of careless. And there's so many times in the movie that he contradicts his own kind of mantra, his own code. So everything basically goes horribly wrong when he misses. He's on a job, he was watching and waiting, and when the time finally came, he missed. And watching just the shift happen in his head, right? He went from being so cool, so calm, giving us like a textbook, you know, giving us a lecture on what it means to be a killer, to suddenly hyperventilating, on the verge of a breakdown. And one of the things I appreciated about this movie is how the change in his kind of headspace is very much mirrored in his actions, right? In the way that he does things. Like, he totally just changes his approach. Like, he starts to behave like a man on the run, right? Like, you get this sense that he's going all in. Like, this is his last hurrah in a lot of ways. The longer we watch this killer, the more we kind of we start to see a lot of contradictions, right? Like, there's not a lot of dialogue in this movie. There's not a lot of conversation. Most of the dialogue is this kind of code that he repeats over and over again. And the more he repeats it, and the more you watch him, you're just like, sir, you keep contradicting yourself, right? Like, everything is personal. To be honest, like, a lot of luck got him from point A to point B. Like, there were moments in this movie where I was laughing, and maybe that's just my grim, I don't know, sense of humor. But I'm like, sir, didn't you just say this? And didn't you just do this over here? So he starts to take a number of like unnecessary risks. And you can kind of see him like throughout the movie. And I think this speaks to Michael Fassbender's performance of him kind of like, he doesn't know where it will end, right? Like, a part of the tension in this movie is like, what are you going to do? You know, like, how will this end? And you can kind of see him subtly debating it, right? Like, he doesn't even know where this is going. Like, he's going back and forth. And it's not until like he's kind of in the moment that he decides. Much as he wants to be detached, he does let his emotions at times get the better of him. And I think having this code kind of over and over and over again, one of the things it does is kind of really show us what kind of person this is, right? Like, this is a person that's devoid of emotions, but no matter how devoid you are of humanity, like, we all still get a little angry sometimes, right? In his case, it takes a little bit more to get him angry, but again, we're all human. And so this code, in part, it does actually keep him alive, right? Like, he does make decisions that you're kind of like, ooh, I wish you hadn't done that, but I totally get why you did that. And that's the thing, the movie kind of leaves you alone to compromise your own morals, right? Like, we know he's a bad person, but like, it's just really funny. Like, we're so in his head that we start to understand why he's doing certain things. Like, there are certain people he shoots where you're like, I wish you hadn't done that, but I get it. And the whole time I'm like, wait a minute, why do I get it? And again, it speaks to how well the movie kind of gets you inside his head and tries to get you to understand his perspective, however sick and crazy it may be. So as I mentioned earlier, the more kind of unhinged he becomes, the more his methods change. Like, this is a guy that's used to killing people from afar, but suddenly he's kind of in their face, right? He's putting himself in great danger for really no reason, right? Like, a lot of the people that he's going after, he has multiple options, right? There are a number of different ways you can kill these people, right? So that fight scene, you guys know what I'm talking about. That was probably one of the best scenes I've seen all year. Like, you just didn't know if he was going to make it out alive. It was so well choreographed. The tension was really unbelievable. If there was an Oscar for best dog, that animal, or best animal, that animal would get it. And again, like, things just kind of hit you out of nowhere. And the reason for that is because he's becoming unhinged, right? Like, the more unhinged he becomes, the more his life, like, the more he's in danger. And so, as I mentioned before, like, the decision to follow one character was really telling and really brave, because it's very hard for the audience, especially for 2 hours, just to follow a single man. But Michael Fassbender does such a great job that even when he's saying nothing, we know exactly what he's thinking, right? We can kind of pinpoint the exact moment, you know, he's about to break. And there's a wonderful scene with Tilda Swinton and this whole bear story where she basically calls him out. She's like, listen, you're not really in it for the money, are you? You're in it because you are a killer and you just enjoy killing people. And so he doesn't blink, and you can kind of, like, she basically reads him for filth. And this is a guy that prides himself on being all mysterious. And here he is completely exposed. And you can see it in Michael Fassbender's face where he feels exposed, right? He feels insecure. And he just kind of repeats that mantra, right? He repeats that mantra in hopes that, you know, maybe this will get him through. But as hard as as badly as he wants to go after everybody and be the best killer that he can be, I mean, even a killer is limited, right? Like, there's only so much we can do. And as much as he wants to pretend like, you know, I don't care about anybody, he has people he cares about, right? He is very angry about what happened to his, you know, girlfriend. He has built a life that he doesn't really want to, you know, run away from. He has all these obligations he has to think about. So the more high risk these kills become, the more he has to kind of ask himself, like, is it worth it? Right? Like, how is it really worth it? So this lead up to the end, the ending, I think, has a lot of people torn, you know, whether or not it kind of wrapped up in a neat little bow. Like, you guys let me know how you felt about the ending, and I'll tell you how I interpreted the ending. So again, throughout the movie, we're watching this man kind of grapple with what he's gonna do next. And up until that last kill, like, it really felt like anything could happen, right? He's gonna be caught. He's going to be killed. Like, he's going to make some mistake. And the movie does a good job of basically letting you know that this man is flying by on luck, right? Like, he is becoming unhinged. And that is just starting to reflect in his actions. And in that last scene with his final target, you know, this guy was well above his pay grade. Right, like, killing this man would mean opening up a wormhole that he just wasn't prepared for. And I think the fact that he acknowledged that, like, he was able to kind of check himself in the end. And there's some part of him you could tell that just wanted to, like, wreak havoc. But again, he's a killer. You know, even a killer has limits, right? Like, he's kind of reached his glass ceiling with this man. So again, he breaks his own code. He ends up trusting this individual in hoping that basically he doesn't really come after him. He goes back to the life he's built. So the ending was interesting because here you have a guy that, you know, despite being a killer, really craved security, right? He's accumulated all this money. He spent years and years perfecting his craft. And in the end, he doesn't want to lose his life, right? He doesn't really want to end up being a man on the run. On the other hand, you do get that feeling like this is not a guy who will be content for too long. Like, the final shot of him just lying down with his girlfriend with his eye twitching, I felt it was kind of an open ending where it's like, is he gonna go back? You know, like, does some part of him wish he was on the run? And again, this is not a man that kills because he needs money. He kills because he clearly enjoys it. So that ending had me mixed the first time I watched it. The second time I could appreciate it. So overall, I think it's a really well-directed movie. I thought the commentary was really funny, like this kind of perfectionist that just, you know, unravels, right? He does everything like he's told himself and taught himself not to do. And it takes every bit of him to kind of like restrain himself from going off the deep end. And, you know, again, even the most interesting job, or even, I guess, seemingly interesting job, can be boring, right? Like, most of his time is just spent watching and waiting, right? Like, nothing is ever as exciting as it seems. And so this was a really interesting movie. It's definitely a movie that has a high replay value. Like, I could definitely watch it again. And like, Michael Fassbender's performance was so good that it was worth a watch. You know, like, I think he does such a great job that I could have watched him read the phone book. And in terms of David Fincher's direction, I mean, this movie was sharp. It was smooth as a criminal. And in terms of the script, I'll leave that up to you. You know, like, that ending, I'm still mulling over, I'm not gonna lie. But you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.